Welcome to In His Grip with Dr. Chuck F. Betters, produced by Mark Inc. Ministries. Each In His Grip message is designed to help turn your hearts toward Jesus and equip you to walk by faith. Let's join Dr. Betters in the sanctuary as he preaches the series Valley of Baca.
Well, we have choices, you see. We want our choices. And you know, those choices go into our spiritual condition, don't they? We translate all of that and we say, God, you must give me choices. If I don't like the direction you're leading me, then I can rebel against that and I can go the way I think I should go. That's more pleasing to me, and thus I can orient you out of my life and do what I want to do. And we play that kind of game spiritually. People tolerate the church. They say it's a nice thing to have around. Blessed are those, verse 5, whose strength is in you. We're on a pilgrimage, he says. And in that pilgrimage, God will give you strength to believe when you don't want to believe. Strength to obey when you don't want to obey. Strength to suffer. Strength to find your way back into the dwelling place of God. You know, there are people who think I'm all messed up since our son died. And they're absolutely right. You don't lose a child without getting messed up. But I hope one thing has become consistently clear. I hope one thing since we lost our 16-year-old son has become perfectly clear from the pulpit. If you haven't gotten this message, you haven't gotten anything that I've tried to say to you. This preacher and this preacher's wife and family are absolutely incapable in any way, shape, or form of handling that kind of grief. And in that sense, we are messed up. I don't know how a non-Christian faces what we've had to face. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how somebody who has no hope that death is not final survives something like this. We have claimed Psalm 84:5 so many times. Blessed are those whose strength is in you. If you had asked me on July the 5th, 1993, the day before July the 6th, 1993, when our child was killed in that car accident, Chuck, you are going to lose a son, and you are going to remain faithful to the preaching of the gospel, and you and your family are not only going to survive, but we are going to see the tables turned and Satan dealt a significant blow, and you are going to be at the heart of that, and you are going to move forward and preach with more authority and power than you've ever done before. And then he turns to my wife and says, you are going to write a book, and you are going to see that book used of God all over the country, and the heart of that experience is going to be rooted in the fact that you have lost that child. If he had turned to my two sons and to my daughter and said to them on July the 5th, that these things are going to happen and you are going to walk after God and serve him in ways you never dreamed possible. If somebody had said that to us, we probably would have slapped them right in the mouth. But aren't you glad our strength is in him? Everything inside of me screams out, I can't do this. I can't do this. You don't know how many times I have quit. I've got like 5, this is going to shock my session. There are 5 letters of resignation to you from me on my computer. Each one's different. They're all the same because I've said, I can't do this anymore. I can't, I can't, I can't. And you know what I've discovered? I can't. But he can. That's remarkable to me. I'm up here and I am telling you, I don't have the strength to follow after the things of God. And I know as you sit there, you don't have the strength to follow after the things of God. But that's what the psalmist says. He says, you know, my return trip in this pilgrimage, in this alienation back to you begins with understanding that truth, that if I am going to survive as a Christian, if I am going to maintain my understanding of what it means to trust in God, it's going to have to begin with the belief that my strength is not in self, my strength is in God. Verse 6. Watch this now. As they pass through the Valley of Baca, they make it a place of springs. The autumn rains also cover it with pools. Now here's the man on a return trip back to intimacy with God. He was alienated in verses 1 through 4. He is on his way back now in verses 5 through 8. Baca is a place known for its balsam or mulberry trees. Baca literally means the balsam trees. It's probably the place that is referred to in Judges chapter 2, which in that particular passage is called the Valley of Baca. Now let me read these verses to you. You don't have to turn to it, but it's going to help you to understand why David picked the Valley of Baca to illustrate his return trip back to God. It says in Judges chapter 2, it says, the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land that I swore to give to your forefathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you. You shall not make a covenant with the people of this land, but you shall break down their altars. Yet you have disobeyed me. Why have you done this? Now therefore I tell you that I will not drive them out before you. They will be thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a snare to you. When the angel of the Lord had spoken these things to all the Israelites, the people wept aloud. And they called that place Bochim, or the place of tears. There they offered sacrifices to the Lord. The Valley of Bochim is the place of weeping. It's the place where you cry. It's the place where your heart is broken. It's the place when you're afraid. It's the place where the lights go out. It's the desert. It's the place of sorrow. And to the Jews of David's day, whenever they referred to the Valley of Baca, they were referring to the place of sorrow. Now notice in verse 5, he begins with, my strength is in you, but then he talks about the pilgrimage that takes you through the valley of sorrow. The place of the tears, the place of weeping. This is where a pilgrimage back into the presence of God usually begins. It usually begins with people who are broken. In fact, may I suggest to you, you cannot find intimacy with God apart from brokenness. When we lost our son, it caused us to revisit everything we believe. We've had our share of critics. We've had people tell us literally that they were offended by the fact that we brought challenges before you of what faith in Christ really means. There are people who are offended by weakness that is shown in the Valley of Baca. But may I suggest to you, that's where it begins. That's where true intimacy begins. You must begin at the place of brokenness. But here's the promise. Here's the promise. Whenever a weeping saint makes the turn out of sorrow, out of tragedy, out of rebellion, or out of whatever, on his road back to God, God promises that sorrow will be turned into joy. That's the promise. The Valley of Baca, the actual Valley of Bochim or Baca, during the dry season was well traveled by the pilgrims back to Jerusalem. The roads were maintained and they could travel right through, but it was a desert. And there were sudden shower storms that would come up, and the people would actually dig little holes along the Valley of Baca on their way back to Jerusalem. They would dig these holes, the shower storms would come, and the holes would fill up, and they would take a drink out of those holes. And as they traveled from the desert all the way through the Valley of Baca back to Jerusalem, they would come across these holes that had been dug by previous pilgrims. And they would take water. They would dig trenches, so to speak, allow them to fill up with rainwater from the sudden showers. Now, this not only provided refreshment for the weary pilgrim, but it oftentimes provided refreshment for the pilgrims that were coming after them. In other words, I would dig a hole, take of the rainwater, drink it, but it would also provide something for you in your weary travel. Now, David talks about this Valley of Bochim, this Valley of Baca. And you know, that's the irony of divine sovereignty. My seasons of refreshing and my seasons of drinking of the rainwater in the middle of my own personal tragedies may be for your benefit. And yours may be for the next weary traveler that comes along. You see, Christians get cancer, just like non-Christians do. Christians lose loved ones in car accidents, just like non-Christians do. And oftentimes, the one is set up against the other for the purpose of demonstrating to the world the difference between faith and faithlessness. So what I go through when I drink the water out of the desert of my own life, and feel the refreshment in my pilgrimage back to the presence of God may be for your benefit. You may be coming along after me. And then someone else may be coming along after you. This is the point David's trying to make. There are brooks in the way. There are places of refreshment in the way. And as I move through the darkness of my own experience, it will shed light for you so that you can walk through when the experience and the lights go out in your experience and the tragedy hits you. And it will. That's how God sovereignly controls along the way. Listen, along the way there are going to be dry seasons in the pilgrimage. In fact, in the Valley of Baca, during the rainy season, the roads were washed out. So the pilgrims couldn't travel. So what they had to do is they had to build trenches along the mulberry trees, which sucked up all the water, so that the drainage would come off the roads so that the passageway could be made clear. There are times when God pours out His abundance on you and blesses your socks off, and things are going well. Your life is in order. You've come through some terrible things, and life is good. In June of 1993, 1 month before our lives were altered forever, I sat in the backyard of my house. I think I've told you this story before, but many of you have never heard it. So I'll say it again. It fits here. 1 month before that tragedy, I sat out in our backyard. I started putting together the things that God had brought us through. He brought us through cancer. He brought us through church conflict, 4 years of it. He brought us through character assassinations, where things that were said about me that simply weren't true, I had no way of defending, nor a desire to defend. He brought me through depression. He brought me through a period where I didn't know who I could trust or why I should trust them. He brought me through crisis in ministry. And I can give you a list of all the things that He did. All of our children, all 4 of them, were walking with God. And it seemed like he had brought us to the end of a very difficult time in ministry. And I sat there in my backyard and I began to muse on how good life was. I began to think, Lord, you really have blessed us. Everything's going well. Boy, I tell you, I want you to know the water was rushing in that desert. The streams were running. There was no need to go looking for a hole in the ground to find some water. It was all over the place. The rainy season had come. But just as the order of the stars, where Job would say, canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion, where he notes the change in the seasons, that though you're in the winter now, the spring is coming. And if you're in the spring, be assured that the winter is coming. That the seasons change, so also do the circumstances in your life. Yes, you're in a respite, but you're about to face the most incredible war you've ever had to face. I didn't know that. I didn't know God was going to dry up the desert. I didn't know that the road was going to be washed out. I didn't know that we were going to have to walk from hole to hole to hole just to survive. A little rain, a little taste of intimacy with God, a little hole in the ground, a little brook in the way is enough to move you on to the next hole. Enough to move you on to greater intimacy. It's enough of the taste of refreshment to say, there must be more of God I need to discover. There must be more. In this valley of sorrow, in this valley of tears, although I taste of nothing but this little hole in the ground, some other weary traveler has walked this way, and somebody else is coming behind me. So I'll take a drink and I'll move on. In order to experience greater intimacy with my God, even in the most terrible desert, the most painful losses can become springs, no, pools of revival for the weary traveler. Pilgrims passing through the Valley of Baca scoff at the shortage of water, for their eyes are fixed on Jerusalem. Their eyes are fixed on the goal, and that is to have intimacy with God. And so they strive after that. They say, God, I won't let you go until you touch me. You know, oftentimes in the midst of that kind of sorrow, you let go. But he doesn't. Now, he may be holding you around the neck while you're dangling over the cliff. You may be gasping for air, but he has promised, I will never, 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 never forsake you. It's like a child who is jumping into the swimming pool for the first time. You're there in the bottom of the pool. You're there. You're standing 2 feet from them. And you're saying, come on, jump, jump. And they're standing there like this. And you're saying, trust me, trust me. And even though that child's life is wrapped up around you, there's something inside of him or her that says, I don't trust you. And I'm not going to jump. Sometimes it takes another sibling who's walked that path to come behind them and push them. Right? Sometimes the weary traveler who thinks he's all alone in that desert needs another pilgrim who's already walked that walk to give them a shove, to push them along. And when we fall into the pool, although the fear is there, and although it takes our breath away, our Father is there to grab us. I've never had one of our children jump into the pool, and I stand there and I watch them and laugh while they drown. Now, they don't know that. But I know that when they jump, I am more conscious of the fact that they're scared and that I want to provide safety so that they will know that the next time around, they don't have to be afraid. That's the Valley of Baca. Notice in verse 7, they go from strength to strength. They go from, literally, by the way, some of your translations may have this, they go from company to company, person to person. Now, notice that the NIV translators say strength to strength because the root of that word is focused on the concept of strength. That I get my strength from going from hole in the ground to hole in the ground, but somebody made those holes. Somebody carved out that path for me. That's the goal. Notice what he keeps his eyes fixed on till each appears before God in Zion. That's the goal of the pilgrim. That's what kept him moving through the Valley of Baca. He knew that he would get to Jerusalem. He knew that when he got there, he would discover intimacy with God that he longed for and craved after. This is the journey of suffering, from strength to strength, from company to company, from brook in the way to brook in the way, from person to person. Listen to me. Your journey is not made alone. We would not have survived without you. And I mean that. I can't tell you how many of you pushed us from behind and said, go swimming. Now, some of you took us by the hand a little more gently. Said, now you need to move along. I thank God for those of you, and there are a few of you, who are willing to go into the inner chamber and suffer with us. But most of you, in your encouragement and in your support, moved us along. Strength to strength. You gave us hope. You didn't say, walk through this. You said, let's walk through this. Proverbs 13 says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. Your heart can get sick when you lose hope. Your body can get sick when you lose hope. Your mind can become sick when you lose hope. And so we need those brooks in the way. Listen, if Moses needed Aaron and Hur to hold up his hands during the battles he fought, how much more do we need the strength of other believers to hold us up when we grow weary? That's why he says in verse 8, hear my prayer, O Lord God Almighty. Listen to me, O God of Jacob. Grace is our starting point. Grace is our ending point. But along the way, God makes provisions, sometimes exclusively of himself, other times with pilgrims who have dug the holes ahead of us. There's one pilgrim. I've never met him. He's dead. Never met him. Who walked through that valley and dug that hole so that I could drink out of it. He wrote a book in which he brought into question the very sovereignty of God, the very love of God. The conclusion of the first half of that book was that God is not a God of love. That God, in fact, he even said this, God, you are an evil God. But as the book unfolds, as he tells the story of his own loss, where he suffered the loss of his own wife, he begins to raise and answer questions. Now, that book was my hole in the ground 1 month after we lost our child. I sat in there and I said, that's me, that's me, that's me. Now, he carved out the pathway, doesn't even know he did it. and raise the questions that I raised. For whom are you a brook in the way? Or are you in the rainy season now? Everything's going well. Things are good. Life is good. Nothing really bad is happening to you now, is there? Your desert will come. And when it does, your eyes must be fixed on Jerusalem. Your eyes must be fixed on the goal. That at all costs, I must have intimacy with my Father. I must jump into the pool. I must trust Him. I must know Him. I must discover things about Him I never knew before. And you may need a few siblings behind you to push you in. You may need a few to go ahead of you that have carved the way, so that you may drink out of the pools of their experiences. But rest assured, you will all travel at one point in your life through the Valley of Baca. In the end, I can tell you, because I've walked there, am walking there. In the end, you will not be able to shake your finger in God's face and say, you failed me, you deserted me, you left me, you forsook me. Instead, you will discover intimacy with Him you never dreamed possible.
Thank you for listening. For the complete sermon, please visit markinc.org and click In His Grip. Join Dr. Chuck F. Betters in the sanctuary from Monday to Thursday on the In His Grip podcast.